Disturbing stories of betrayal among royals to fall asleep till night settles softly over the Thames, and the river carries its secrets without sound. Stone walls darken as if drawing breath, and somewhere within them a question waits, patient as frost on glass. How does a crown become a coffin? How does a promise of protection harden into a lock that never opens again? The year is 1483, and England is exhausted. Decades of war have trained the land to flinch at footsteps, to listen for treachery in every echo. The roses have bled each other pale. When King Edward IV dies suddenly, the kingdom exhales and holds its breath at the same time. His heir is a boy of 12, Edward, slender and solemn beyond his years, with a younger brother, Richard, trailing behind like a shadow that has not yet learned fear. They are princes born into a country that has learned how easily blood can be exchanged for order. The Tower of London rises beside the river, not yet a legend of cruelty, but already ancient, already heavy with the weight of watched lives. Its stones are pale in daylight and unforgiving at dusk. To the people, it is a place of safety for the crown, a fortress where kings are made secure before coronation. To the boys, it is presented as a temporary shelter, a pause before glory. Men bow as they pass. Doors open. Smiles are worn carefully. Their uncle walks with them. Richard, Duke of Gloucester, moves with a calm that reassures the anxious and unsettles those who looked along. His posture is precise, his gaze steady. He speaks of duty and guardianship, of the need to protect the realm from unrest. He speaks softly, the way one does when the stakes are high. England, he says, needs certainty. England, he says, needs a firm hand until the boy king is ready. At first, the princes are seen. They play within the walls. They are spotted at windows, pale faces behind iron bars, waving at the river traffic below. Servants carry their meals. Guards change shifts. Time continues to move, slow and obedient. Then the sightings thin. A rumor replaces a glimpse. A whisper takes the place of a wave. Within the tower, sound behaves differently. Footsteps linger. Doors speak long after they have closed. The boys' chambers become quieter, as if the air itself has learned restraint. Those who serve learn not to ask questions. Loyalty, in a court shaped by survival, is often indistinguishable from silence. Outside the walls, England rearranges itself. Richard of Gloucester takes control, declaring the princes illegitimate, their father's marriage flawed, their claim to the throne dissolved by law and parchment. It is a clean argument, bloodless on its surface, satisfying to men who prefer ink to knives. He is crowned King Richard III, and the bells ring as if nothing has been lost. But bells cannot drown out whispers. Where are the princes? No public announcement comes. No funeral procession passes through the streets. No black cloth is hung in mourning. The absence itself becomes the loudest sound in the realm. Mothers pull their children closer. Nobles exchange looks that do not last long enough to be called conversation. In the tower, the guards continue their duties. Some are replaced. Others vanish into other assignments, other towns, other lives. The river flows. Seasons change. The boys are not seen again. Stories begin to form because humans cannot endure empty spaces for long. Some say the princes were smothered in their sleep, pillows pressed down by hands that trembled only once. Others say they were starved quietly, their meals delayed until hunger became a language no one answered. There are tales of secret orders, of midnight footsteps, of a trusted knight who obeyed because obedience was the only way to remain alive. There are also tales that Richard did not give the order at all, that the crime was committed by men who anticipated his desires without being told, who understood that power rarely needs to speak plainly. And there are those who say the princes were moved, hidden, spared. That one lived. That's somewhere beyond the sea. A boy with a royal scar and borrowed name grew into a man carrying a memory too dangerous to share. These stories cling to hope the way fog clings to stone, thin but persistent. Years later, after another war and another fallen king, workmen repairing a staircase within the tower uncover a small wooden chest. Inside are bones delicate, unfinished, unmistakably young. They are reburied with solemnity, identified by tradition if not by certainty. The discovery closes nothing. It opens the wound again. The tower does not comment. It never has. Its walls have learned the discipline of endurance. They have watched men pray and men plead. They have watched promises rot in the mouths of those who made them. If stone can remember, then the tower remembers everything and says nothing. Richard III does not rule long. He dies in battle, his body stripped and displayed, the last of his line. History is unkind to him. He is named a monster, a hunchback villain in later tellings, his image sharpened by those who replaced him. Yet even condemnation does not answer the central question. Did he order the deaths of his nephews? Or did the machine of power complete the task without instruction? Was the betrayal a single command, or a collective understanding that children were expendable if they stood between men and crowns? Perhaps this is the deeper unease, that no single villain is required, that a system built on inheritance and fear can erase the innocent without leaving fingerprints, that men sworn to protect can convince themselves that silence is service, that obedience absolves them of blood. The princes fade into legend, their faces imagined anew by each generation. Edward, the boy king who never ruled. Richard, the younger brother who followed him into shadow. They exist now in the space between fact and mourning, preserved not by graves but by unanswered questions. And the tower still stands. At dusk, when the light thins and the river darkens, its stones seem to lean inward, listening to themselves. Tourists come and go. Ravens perch and depart. But beneath the surface of routine, there remains a gravity, a pull that reminds those who pass that this was once a place where children were trusted to walls, that understood ambition better than mercy. The crown passed on. England survived. It always does. Yet survival does not mean innocence. Somewhere between coronation and confinement, between duty and desire, a choice was made or allowed to be made. The echo of that choice lingers, soft and persistent, like a breath held along. If you stand close enough to the tower, when the city quiets and the river slows, you might feel it. Not a sound, not a vision, but a pressure. The sense of something unfinished. To lives paused mid-sentence. A story that refuses to settle into certainty. Power teaches many lessons, but its most dangerous is this, that erasure could be cleaner than confrontation, and silence more effective than steel. The brothers who entered the tower learned the lesson without being taught, and the tower learned it again, adding their absence to its collection. Stone remembers, rivers remember, and history, for all its ink and judgment, still hesitates here and able to say, with finality, how a crown became a coffin and why no one stopped it once the door was closed. Fog rolls in from the channel like a slow confession, softening the edges of castles and consciences alike. In the half-light before dawn, bells toll not for prayer, but for transition. Somewhere between queen and traitor, between wife and executioner, a woman learns how quietly a crown can be removed from a man's head while he is still breathing. England at the dawn of the 14th century is a kingdom stitched together by suspicion. Edward II sits uneasily on the throne, a king by inheritance, but not by temperament. He prefers favorites to councils, affection to authority. His court murmurs, his barons resent him, and his wife Isabella of France watches everything. She is young when she arrives in England, daughter of the formidable King Philip IV of France. Raised among iron-willed men and lessons learned early, power is never gifted, only taken or lost. Her marriage is political, her role ceremonial, her value measured in heirs. At first, she tries to be what the crown demands. She bears children. She smiles in public. She waits. But Edward does not see her. His attention belongs elsewhere, given lavishly to companions whose influence over him grows more obvious with each passing year. Honors are granted, lands redistributed, and the queen is left standing at the edge of her own court, dressed in silk and irrelevance. Humiliation settles over her like cold ash. In a palace full of voices, she is unheard. Time hardens her. By the time Isabella travels to France on diplomatic business, she is no longer simply a queen performing duty. She is a woman measuring exits. In Paris, she breathes differently. The air remembers her name. It is there she meets Roger Mortimer, exiled, ambitious, sharp-eyed, a man shaped by grievance and opportunity. Between them, understanding forms quickly, the way fires do when the ground is dry. They speak first of reform, then of necessity, then of removal. England, they decide, cannot survive Edward II as king, not because he is cruel, but because he is weak in ways that invite chaos. Isabella convinces herself this is not betrayal, but rescue, that she is saving the realm, and perhaps even her children, from a father whose failures stain the crown itself. When she returns, she does not come alone. Soldiers follow. Banners rise. Barons defect. Edward II, abandoned by many who once swore loyalty, flees. The King of England becomes a hunted man in his own land, betrayed not by enemies, but by the woman who once stood beside him at coronation. He is captured quietly. There is no grand battle, no heroic last stand, just doors closing, guards turning keys, the slow realization that power has already left the room. Isabella ensures his deposition is formal, legal, almost polite. Parliament declares him unfit to rule. His son is crowned in his place, a boy king with a mother ruling in his name. Edward too is sent away, moved between castles like an object awkward to destroy outright. Officially, he is alive. Officially, he is safe. But safety, in royal language, is often temporary. What happens next is where history lowers its voice. Edward dies in captivity. The announcement is brief, the explanation vague. Some say illness, others whisper darker things. A poker heated and applied where no mark would show. Poison administered by trusted hands. Starvation disguised as neglect. No consensus forms, only revulsion. The truth, whatever it was, is buried with him. Isabella does not attend a public mourning. She does not need to. She rules. With Mortimer at her side, she governs England through her son, redistributing power, settling scores, enjoying a freedom she has never known. For a time, it works. The kingdom stabilizes. The machinery of state resumes its rhythm. But betrayal is never a single act. It echoes. Mortimer grows bold. To bold, he takes titles, lands, authority that should never belong to a subject. The court begins to murmur again, and the young King Edward III watches. He learns. He listens. He understands, perhaps better than anyone, the cost of being overlooked. One night, Mortimer is arrested, dragged from power with the same efficiency he once admired. He is executed as a traitor. Isabella is spared death, but not consequence. She is removed from authority, given comfort without control. A queen reduced to a shadow, living out her years in wealth and isolation. She never publicly speaks of Edward II again. History debates her endlessly. Was she a monster? A survivor? A woman driven to extremes by neglect and necessity? The sources disagree. Chroniclers sharpen their quills. Later generations paint her as the she-wolf of France, teeth bared, heartless and cold. Yet such names simplify what was never simple. She did not swing the blade. She did not write the final order in ink. But she set the world in motion where her husband could be erased. She learned what many before and after her would learn. That power does not require blood on one's hands, only the willingness to look away when it is spilled. Edward II's ghost lingers in England's memory as a cautionary figure, a king undone not by invasion, but by intimacy, betrayed by the one person who stood closest, sold not for gold, but for control. And Isabella? She fades into legend as well. A queen who crossed a line and survived it. A woman who learned that crowns can be transferred without ceremony. That love and loyalty are luxuries rulers rarely afford. At night, when the castles grow quiet and the corridors remember footsteps long gone, her story remains suspended between justification and condemnation. A reminder that betrayal, when wrapped in silk and spoken softly, can pass for governance. And that sometimes the most devastating revolutions begin not with armies, but with a marriage that quietly stops, pretending. Marble remembers footsteps long after flesh forgets them. In Constantinople, sound does not disappear, it settles. It clings to columns and domes, drifts through corridors scented with incense and old ambition. Here, where the Bosphorus divides worlds, betrayal is not an interruption of order. It is the order itself. The city wakes slowly beneath the pale eastern sky. Mosaics cast the light like fragments of broken stars. Bells murmur prayers while politics whisper louder. This is the heart of Byzantium in the 11th century, an empire dressed in gold and riddled with fear. Power is sacred here, but it is never secure. It passes from hand to hand like a relic that burns those who hold it too long. Emperor Romanos III walks these halls with the confidence of a man who believes marriage has made him immortal. He is older, deliberate, fond of ceremony. His crown came not through conquest, but through union wed to Zoe Porphyrogenita, a woman born into purple, her bloodline older than memory. To marry Zoe is to touch legitimacy itself. To disappoint her is to invite annihilation. Zoe has lived her entire life inside these walls. She has watched emperors rise and vanish, watched favorites become corpses, watched prayers answered with knives. Time has taught her patience, but not mercy. Romanos grows distant. His affection cools. His failures, military, political, personal, become harder to ignore. The court senses the shift before the emperor does. Courtiers lean towards Zoe. Glances linger. The air changes. Michael arrives quietly. Handsome, attentive, dangerous in the way ambition often is when it learns to kneel. He listens to Zoe. He admires her. He becomes necessary. What begins as companionship hardens into conspiracy, though no one names it aloud. In Byzantium, words are liabilities. Romanos III dies in his bath. The water is warm. Steam fogs the chamber. Servants hear splashing, then silence. When they enter, the emperor is submerged, his body slack, his face unrecognizable. Officially, it is an accident, an unfortunate slip. The court nods. The priests pray. Zoe mourns just long enough to satisfy custom. Within days, she marries Michael. Michael ascends the throne, and the empire accepts him because the empire has learned to accept what survives. The people cheer, though they do not know why. The Senate adjusts. The church blesses. Power continues, as it always does, indifferent to the manner of its transfer. Yet betrayal has momentum. It does not stop once the crown changes hands. Michael IV is sickly, ruled as much by his brother as by his own will. Zoe, now empress again, finds herself sidelined by men who fear her influence. She has elevated one emperor. She can destroy another. That knowledge frightens them more than any army. Michael IV dies after years of illness, and the throne trembles once more. Zoe adopts a nephew, Michael V, raising him from obscurity into purple. It is meant to secure continuity, to preserve her place within the machinery of rule. She gives him legitimacy. She gives him survival. He repays her with exile. The order is sudden, brutal. Guards arrive not as servants, but as captors. Zoe is dragged from the palace she has never known without, her hair cut, her robes torn away. She is forced into a convent, stripped of title and voice. The city awakens to the impossible. The woman born to rule has been erased by the son she crowned. Constantinople does not accept this quietly. The people pour into the streets. They do not riot for abstract justice. They riot for continuity, for the belief that sacred blood still matters. The name of Zoe is shouted like a prayer turned curse. Michael V panics. He hides in Hagia Sophia, clinging to the altar, believing sanctuary can protect him from history. It cannot. He is dragged out, blinded, reduced to darkness in the city of light. His reign ends not with ceremony, but with screams echoing off holy stone. The betrayal he committed returns to him multiplied, perfected. Zoe returns, older, harder, crowned again beside her sister, Theodora. To women ruling an empire that devours its own. The court bows lower this time. They have seen what happens when bloodlines are ignored. Yet even now, trust does not return. It never does. Byzantium survives Romanos, survives Michael again. It always survives. But survival here is not peace, it is continuity of conflict. Sons overthrow fathers. Nephews imprison mothers. Marriage is a weapon. Adoption is a trap. Love is irrelevant. The marble floors remain polished. The mosaics remain luminous. But beneath them lies a sediment of betrayal so thick it might as well be mortar. No confession ever emerges. No official decree names the murder in the bath. The quiet hands that held an emperor under water while steam rose like incense. History records outcomes, not intentions. It lists reigns, not suffocations. And so the question lingers in the corridors of Constantinople. Drifting through the ruins that remain, was Romanos murdered by command or by understanding? Did Zoe order his death, or did the court act because it knew what power required next? Perhaps that is the most Byzantine answer of all. That betrayal here is never singular. It is shared. A collective agreement that some lives are obstacles, and obstacles must be removed without noise. When night falls over the city and the Bosphorus reflects only darkness, the stones seem to listen again. They have heard emperors plead, lovers swear loyalty, sons promise obedience. They have learned the weight of those words. In Byzantium, the crown does not rest on a head. It floats passing silently from hand to hand until someone reaches to eagerly. Then it falls, heavy as judgment, and another name is added to the long, unbroken story of those who learned late that power is never inherited without betrayal, and never held without blood finding its way into the water. Stone carters hold their breath differently when blood is shared by name. In Castile, where sun-baked walls glow like embers at dusk, betrayal does not arrive screaming. It arrives as a decision made in silence, shaped by prayer and fear, and sealed by a mother's steady hand. The 14th century moves heavily across the Iberian plains. Kingdoms fracture and reform like cracked clay, and the crown of Castile sits uneasily upon a young man already whispered about in corners. Pedro is king now. Pedro, son of Alfonso XI, sharp-eyed, quick to anger, relentless in memory. He has learned early that mercy is often mistaken for weakness and that the throne, once threatened, must be defended without apology. His reign becomes a series of reckonings. Nobles who once smiled to easily find themselves accused, imprisoned, executed. Lovers are elevated and discarded. Enemies vanish. The court learns to stand very still when Pedro enters a room. They name him cruel, but cruelty is rarely born alone. It is taught. It is inherited. And watching from the edges of his court is his mother, Maria of Portugal, a queen whose life has been an education in humiliation. She was a political marriage, set aside for another woman, made to watch as her husband paraded affection elsewhere, while she endured with dignity sharpened by resentment. Years have passed, but memory does not age quietly. Maria knows power intimately, not as something she holds, but as something that moves around her, ignoring her wishes. She has learned how quickly favor shifts, how bloodlines mean nothing without loyalty to support them. When her son ascends the throne, she watches him carefully. At first, there's pride, then concern, then fear. Pedro's enemies multiply. His methods are effective, but brutal. Each execution quiets one threat and awakens three more. Rebellion stirs in whispers, then gathers and names chief among them. Enrique of Trastamara, Pedro's half-brother, illegitimate but ambitious, backed by nobles who have learned that survival may require replacing the king. Castile becomes a land of divided loyalties. Cities close their gates. Banners are raised and lowered in the same week. Brothers face brothers across fields where wheat should grow. And through it all, Maria watches the kingdom slide toward civil war, understanding something her son refuses to see, that a king can be right and still be doomed. Pedro trusts no one fully. Not his counselors, not his allies, not even blood. His suspicion becomes doctrine. He rules as if surrounded, because he is. Each death he orders feels justified, necessary. Each enemy removed feels like oxygen restored. Yet fear does not dissipate. It thickens. Maria begins to speak quietly with those who oppose him. At first, she tells herself it is only conversation, a mother's concern for the realm, a queen's duty to stability. She listens to grievances, she nods. She remembers her own sidelining, her own erasure, and recognizes the same patterns playing out on a grander scale. She is not blind to Pedro's faults, nor to his virtues. She knows he is her son. She knows he is also becoming a liability the kingdom may not survive. Enrique offers an alternative. He is charming where Pedro is severe, generous where Pedro is exacting. He promises reconciliation, balance, and end to executions that stain a land. He promises to honor Maria, to restore her influence, to listen. Promises are easy, but Maria has lived long enough to know that so is destruction. Still, she chooses. The choice is not announced. It is not signed. It is made in the spaces between words, in the decision to stop warning Pedro, to stop defending him, to allow plans to proceed without interference. In Castile, betrayal does not always mean handing over a knife. Sometimes it means removing the shield. Pedro's downfall is swift once it begins. Allies defect. Cities fall. His army thins. He flees, furious and betrayed, seeking support beyond Castle's borders. For a time, it seems possible he might return stronger, sharpened by exile. But fate tightens its grip. Near Montiel, in a tent heavy with heat and exhaustion, Pedro is cornered. Enrique arrives. The brothers face each other in close quarters. The air thick with old grievances and unspoken truths. Words are exchanged, some say insults, others say pleas. Then steel. Enrique kills Pedro with his own hands. The body of the king lies still, blood dark against the earth of his kingdom. News spreads quickly. The civil war ends not with peace, but with relief. The executions stop. The crown passes. Castile exhales. Maria does not publicly celebrate. She survives her son. She lives on in a court reshaped by his death, honored by the man who replaced him. Yet survival is not vindication. History will remember her as a mother who chose the kingdom over her child, or as a traitor who abandoned her blood when it became inconvenient. Chroniclers sharpen their judgments, but none of them sat awake at night weighing the cost of loyalty against the collapse of a realm. Did she order his death? No document says so. Did she enable it? Almost certainly. In royal houses, intention is often less important than allowance. What is not stopped becomes policy. Pedro's reputation hardens after death. He is called the cruel, his acts catalogued without context, his paranoia stripped of its origins. Enrique becomes king, remembered as a restorer. His own brutality is softened by comparison. History prefers its villains singular and its saviors convenient. Yet in the quiet spaces, the question remains unresolved. Was Pedro a monster born, or a king forged by betrayal long before he learned to wield it? And was Maria a villain, or a woman who recognized late that the crown devours even those it births? Castilian nights stretch long. Wind moves through abandoned fortresses, carrying the memory of banners no longer flown. Somewhere in that wind is the echo of a mother's silence, heavy with consequence. She outlived the decision she made, which is sometimes the harshest punishment history can offer. Power demands sacrifice. Sometimes it demands sons, and the land remembers. Fields where armies march now grow wheat again, indifferent to blood once spilled. Stones where Pedro stood still absorb new footsteps. But lineage does not forget so easily. The dynasty continues, altered, scarred, carrying within it the quiet truth that the most devastating betrayals are not committed by enemies at the gate, but by those who know exactly where the walls are weakest and choose not to defend them. In Castile, the crown survived. The kingdom endured. But somewhere between mother and son, something sacred was severed, leaving behind a legacy that whispers still, that when power and blood collide, love is often the first casualty and silence the weapon that finishes the work. The earth that Tewkesbury remembers screams better than prayers. Long after banners were torn down and armor sank into rust, the ground kept the sound of it all: the clash, the panic, the sudden understanding that lineage offers no protection once the tide turns. On that spring day in 1471, England learned again how easily hope could be cornered and extinguished. Morning broke beneath a low, unsettled sky. The fields outside Tewkesbury Abbey were damp, heavy with the scent of grass pressed flat by marching feet. Ravens circled early, as if summoned. The Wars of the Roses had trained England to expect blood, but this battle carried a particular weight. It was not merely armies that faced each other, it was futures. Prince Edward of Westminster rode with the Lancastrian forces. The only son of King Henry VI and Queen Margaret of Anjou, he was 17 years old. Though the years had been unkind, exile had sharpened him. Loss had aged him. He had known displacement before he had known comfort, known defeat before he had been allowed to dream. To his followers, he was not merely a prince. He was restoration made flesh, the final thread binding Lancaster to survival. His mother had raised him on stories of inheritance stolen and thrones wrongfully taken. She had taught him that crowns do not simply fall into the right hands, they must be reclaimed. Margaret herself was fire and will, a queen forged by necessity rather than ceremony. She had crossed seas, raised armies, begged and commanded in equal measure. For her son, she had gambled everything. Across the field stood the House of York, hardened by victory and momentum. King Edward IV had returned from exile with speed and fury, cutting through resistance like a storm that had waited long offshore. He was flanked by his brothers George, Duke of Clarence, restless and resentful, and Richard, Duke of Gloucester, quiet, watchful, absorbing everything. They had already won much. Today, they intended to finish it. The battle did not last long. It rarely does when fate has chosen its side. Lancastrian lines buckled. Men fled toward the abbey, believing sacred stone might shield them where steel could not. Edward fought, or tried to. Accounts differ. Some say he charged bravely. Others say he was pulled from his horse. In the chaos, truth fractured like bone. What is certain is that by afternoon, the cause of Lancaster lay broken in the mud. Prince Edward did not die on the field, at least, not immediately. He was captured alive. That fact, small and enormous, changed everything. A living prince is a problem no victorious king can ignore. Dead enemies are history. Living heirs are futures that refuse to stay buried. Edward was brought before the Yorkist leaders, exhausted, bloodied, still breathing. He was young enough to tremble, old enough to understand what stood before him. What was said in that moment has been riddled too many times to be trusted. Some chronicles claim Edward spoke defiantly, declaring he had come to reclaim his father's crown. Others suggest he pleaded, reminding them of his youth. Perhaps he said nothing at all. Silence, in such moments, can be the loudest form of dignity. King Edward IV was present. So were his brothers. And then the prince was dead. There was no trial, no imprisonment, no exile arranged quietly under cover of mercy. His death was swift enough to prevent witnesses, ambiguous enough to permit denial. Chroniclers would later argue over who struck the blow. Some named Clarence, eager to prove loyalty after past betrayal. Others point to Gloucester, whose reputation would later grow dark enough to absorb any accusation. A few insist the king himself ordered it done. The truth dissolves under scrutiny, leaving only consensus on one thing. The boy did not leave that encounter alive. His body was displayed briefly, then buried without ceremony. No grand tomb marked the end of the Lancastrian line. No mourning was permitted beyond what could be managed behind closed doors. Queen Margaret, captured shortly afterward, was spared execution, but not grief. She outlived her son, which is a particular cruelty history inflicts without hesitation. With Edward's death, the House of Lancaster effectively ended. Henry VI, broken and distant, would soon follow murdered in the Tower, quietly, efficiently, as if tidying loose ends. England moved forward, relieved, eager to forget the years of uncertainty. But forgetting is never clean. Tewkesbury Abbey still stands, its stones heavy with what they witnessed. Men were cut down within its walls that day, violating sanctuary in the name of finality. Blood darkened holy ground. Mercy was suspended, not out of rage, but calculation. The war had gone on too long. The Yorkists were done negotiating with ghosts. Prince Edward became one, yet his death unsettled something deeper than dynastic victory. For all their justification, the Yorkists had crossed a line that could not be unmarked. Killing a prince in custody is not war, it is erasure. It is the acknowledgement that legitimacy must sometimes be strangled before it can speak again. Richard of Gloucester, in particular, would carry the weight of such moments forward. Silent figures often do. He learned, perhaps unconsciously, that survival at the highest levels required decisions made before conscience could catch up. Years later, when the other boys vanished behind stone walls, England would remember Tewkesbury and wonder if patterns had simply continued. Queen Margaret never stopped mourning. Exiled, impoverished, she became a living relic of a cause extinguished too thoroughly to revive. She had raised her son to believe in destiny, and destiny had answered with steel. Her rage had carried him to the field. Her love could not carry him back. History, written by those who won, treated Edward of Westminster as a footnote and necessary casualty in the restoration of order. He is rarely granted interiority, rarely allowed to be 17, rarely remembered as a boy who did not choose the war he inherited. But the land remembers differently. Fields remember the weight of young armor. Abbey walls remember blood where prayer should have been. Ravens remember feasts earned without effort. And somewhere in the long echo of England's royal betrayals, the death of the last Lancastrian prince marks a turning point, not because it was especially cruel, but because it was efficient. Efficiency is the language of power when patience runs out. The crown was secured that day, but it was also simplified. No more rival heirs, no more inconvenient sons. The future narrowed into a single line, clear and brutal. England accepted it because exhaustion often masquerades as peace. Yet the cost lingered when rulers later claimed necessity as justification for erasing children. They did so standing on ground already softened by precedent. Tewkesbury taught the realm that sanctuary could be violated, that youth could be dismissed, that bloodlines could be severed without divine consequence. Prince Edward's story does not end with vengeance or revelation, it ends with absence, with the quiet knowledge that sometimes the most decisive battles are not those fought with armies, but those concluded in tents and chambers, where a single life is weighed against stability and found expendable. As night falls over Tewkesbury, the abbey casts a long shadow across the grass. Wind moves through it gently, as if careful not to disturb what lies beneath. The prince is gone. The war is over. The crown endures. But beneath that entrance lies a question England has never fully answered. How many children must be sacrificed before order feels worth the price? The earth does not respond. It never does. It only keeps the memory, waiting patiently for the next time power decides that survival requires silence, and that a young voice, if left alive, might someday ask why. The candle gutters before it goes out, bending low as if bowing to something it already knows. In the great stone halls of Angevin, England, night gathers not as rest, but as reckoning, somewhere between a father's command and a son's ambition. A kingdom begins to fracture quietly, deliberately, until love itself becomes a liability. Henry II has worn the crown for most of his life. He forged an empire not by inheritance alone, but by force of will, stretching his rule from the misted borders of Scotland to the sun-warmed vineyards of Aquitaine. He is tireless, sharp-tongued, endlessly moving, even as age settles into his bones. His mind remains restless, suspicious. Kings who pause do not remain kings for long. He has sons, many of them, and in another life, this would be security. Henry the young king, crowned in his father's lifetime, yet granted no real power. Richard, fierce and magnetic, already more legend than man, raised in the South where poetry and war share the same breath. Geoffrey, clever and venomous, adept at smiling while sharpening words into blades. And John the young and first to matter, watching from the margins, learning what others reveal without meaning to. Henry loves them in the way rulers love heirs, conditionally, anxiously, as extensions of himself rather than separate souls. He names them, titles them, promises them, lands that remain forever just out of reach. Power, he believes, must be controlled, parceled slowly. His sons believe something else entirely, that power delayed is power denied. The court becomes crowded with expectations that cannot all be fulfilled. Each son is raised to rule, yet none are allowed to rule. Each is told to wait, yet taught from birth that waiting is death. Resentment grows in the spaces between gifts and refusals. In the moments when a father chooses governance over generosity, Eleanor of Aquitaine watches all of this unfold. With a patience shaped by experience, she has been Queen of France, Queen of England, mother to kings in waiting. She understands ambition intimately, respects it even when it wounds. She sees what Henry refuses to admit, that sons raised to expect crowns will not forgive being kept from them. Whispers begin, soft at first. Conversations held just long enough to deny intention. Geoffrey encourages, Richard listens. The young king burns with humiliation, crowned but powerless, a king in ceremony alone. Foreign courts notice. The king of France notices most of all. When rebellion comes, it comes wrapped in filial language. The sons do not declare hatred. They declare grievance. They do not reject their father outright. They accuse him of injustice, of broken promises, of hoarding authority that should have been shared. In the vocabulary of rebellion, this is as close to virtue as one can get. Henry is stunned, but not surprised. He has lived along to be naive. Still, there is something uniquely corrosive about being opposed by blood enemies. You expect. Sons are supposed to inherit, not overthrow. The revolt spreads quickly. Barons choose sides. Old loyalties dissolve. Henry moves as he always has, fast, decisive, relentless. He fights not only armies, but the idea that his own legacy is rising against him. Castles fall. Alliances shift. Eleanor is captured while attempting to join her sons. Her punishment not execution, but long, elegant imprisonment. The rebellion fails. For now, Henry survives, but survival changes shape. His sons kneel again, swear loyalty again, receive forgiveness again. On the surface, the empire holds, but something fundamental has broken. Trust, once fractured, does not heal in royal houses. It calcifies. Years pass. Henry the young king dies of illness, his resentment unresolved, his crown a hollow thing carried to the grave. Geoffrey dies in a tournament accident, crushed beneath a horse, his ambitions extinguished without resolution. Richard remains Richard the Lionheart, brilliant, distant, already half a legend. John remains too, overlooked, underestimated. Henry grows older. His body betrays him in small ways. His temper sharpens. He clings tighter to control, convinced that release will only invite chaos. Richard grows impatient. He has fought wars, commanded loyalty, tasted independence. He no longer accepts being managed. France waits again. Richard aligns himself with the French king, Philip II, a man young, calculating, eager to dismantle Henry's empire piece by piece. Together, they apply pressure, military, political, personal. Richard does not hide his defection. He presents it as inevitability, the son against the father, the future against the past. And then comes the final cut, as Henry scrambles to respond, moving between strongholds, exhausted and ill. He requests a list of his enemies, those who have sworn against him. Names are read aloud, each one a small wound. Barons, knights, former allies, and then a name he does not expect to hear, though perhaps he always has. John, his youngest, his afterthought, his favorite. In quieter moments, The son he believed would remain loyal because he had been given the least reason to rebel. The betrayal is complete. Henry collapses, not dramatically, not with theatrical despair, but inwardly, the way old trees give way after standing too long against the wind. Chroniclers record his final days as bitter, his words laced with curses. He rages against God, against fortune, against the children he once held and no longer recognizes. He dies not on a battlefield, but in a chamber thick with resentment and regret. A king undone not by conquest, but by succession, Richard inherits the crown. He weeps, they say, whether from grief, relief, or performance, history cannot agree. He leaves England soon after, chasing crusades and glory elsewhere. John waits. Henry II is buried with ceremony befitting his achievements. His empire fragments quickly. What he built through force of will cannot survive the fractures within his bloodline. Sons who betrayed him now inherit the consequences of that betrayal. Territories weaken, loyalties eroded, the crown less secure than it once appeared. Yet history remembers Henry as a great king. It often does. Greatness, after all, is easier to measure than intimacy. What is harder to name is the moment when fatherhood became strategy, when sons stopped being children and started being threats. Henry believed he was preserving order by withholding power. His sons believed they were correcting injustice by taking it. Somewhere between those beliefs, love was misplaced and loyalty became conditional. The betrayal was not sudden, it was cultivated. In royal houses, children are raised not to be protected, but to be useful. They are taught lineage before affection, ambition before restraint. When they turn against their parents, it is not always rebellion, it is education reaching its logical end. Henry, he taught his sons how to rule. He taught them how to fight. He taught them how to wait. He did not teach them how to be patient, and so they became what the crown required. At night, in the places where Angevin castles once stood, wind moves through broken arches and empty halls. If stone could speak, it might tell of arguments whispered delayed, of embraces replaced by negotiations, of a king who ruled an empire, but could not rule his own succession. The lesson lingers, heavy and unresolved, that power shared despairingly invites betrayal, and power shared freely invites collapse. Between those truths lies a narrow path few rulers ever find. Henry did not find it. He left behind sons who learned that the fastest way to a crown is often over the body of the man who taught you its weight, and in that inheritance, England received not just a new king, but a warning written in blood and lineage alike that the most enduring wars are not fought between nations, but between fathers and sons. When the crown stands between them and refuses to choose, winter settles over Paris like a shroud laid gently, deliberately, upon a body that refuses to die. The streets narrow under frost, and the sea moves thickly, carrying reflections of towers that no longer trust one another. In this city of saints and banners, a queen learns that betrayal does not always come with knives. Sometimes it arrives with signatures, sermons, and the slow withdrawal of voices that once spoke your name. Isabeau of Bavaria entered France as a girl, crowned, young beside Charles VI, a king whose brilliance flickered like a candle to close to the wind. At first, the court glittered, feasts rang with music, processions unfolded like living tapestries. Isabeau learned the choreography of power, when to smile, when to listen, when to remain perfectly still. She bore children. She fulfilled the quiet expectations placed upon queens, believing that continuity itself was a form of security. Then the king's mind fractured. It did not happen all at once. Madness rarely announces itself cleanly. Charles began to forget, to rage, to tremble before phantoms only he could see. He attacked his own knights in moments of terror, fled from mirrors, claimed his body was made of glass and would shatter if touched. The court recoiled in horror and superstition. A sacred king, touched by God, unraveling before their eyes. Power hates uncertainty, as Charles slipped in and out of lucidity. France divided itself around him. Regents were needed. Decisions could not wait for a mind that wandered. Isabeau found herself at the center of a kingdom holding its breath. Men approached her with plans, with proposals, with assurances that they acted for the good of France. They praised her intelligence when it suited them, questioned her virtue when it did not. She learned quickly that every alliance was temporary. The royal family splintered along political lines, Burgundians and Armagnacs each claiming to defend the crown while sharpening blades behind their backs. Assassinations punctuated the years like tolling bells. Streets ran red in daylight. Paris became a city where loyalty was guessed by accent and survival depended on silence. Isabeau was blamed for all of it. Pamphlets appeared, ugly and persistent. They accused her of greed, of infidelity, of selling France to her enemies. They called her foreign, corrupt, unnatural. A woman ruling while her husband's mind drifted was an offense no explanation could soften. Every compromise she made to keep the kingdom functioning was reframed as betrayal. Every choice was proof of guilt. She continued anyway. Children were married into alliances meant to stabilize borders. Funds were raised to pay armies. Treaties were signed under duress. Isabeau navigated a maze with walls that shifted daily, aware that a wrong step could cost her a child, a city, or her life. She was not loved, but she was necessary. For a time, necessity was enough. Then, her own blood turned against her. Her son Charles, the Dauphin, grew up amid chaos. He saw his mother negotiate with men he was taught to hate. He heard accusations, repeated until they sounded like truths. Advisors circled him, whispering that Isabeau had betrayed France, betrayed the crown, betrayed him. They offered clarity in a world that had given him none. When civil war reached its peak, Isabeau made a decision that would seal her fate. The Treaty of Troyes declared that the English king would inherit the French throne, disinheriting her own son. To Isabeau, it was a desperate attempt to end bloodshed, to impose an ending where none could be found. To history, it was unforgivable. The Dauphin rejected the treaty. He rejected his mother. Isabeau was isolated. Her authority dissolved. Her presence became inconvenient. Those who once sought her counsel now avoided her chambers. She was moved, confined, monitored, not imprisoned in chains, but in irrelevance. The court learned to speak of her in the past tense while she was still breathing. She watched from the margins as her son reclaimed France piece by piece, crowned at Reims, celebrated as a savior. His triumph required a villain, and Isabeau fit well to be spared. She became the cautionary tale, the corrupt queen whose ambition nearly destroyed the realm. No one asked what it meant to rule beside a mad king. No one measured the cost of choosing between imperfect options in a country tearing itself apart. History prefers clean stories. It prefers heroes and traitors, not women trapped between duty and impossibility. Isabeau died quietly, her passing noted without ceremony. France moved on, eager to forget the years when its crown trembled. Chroniclers sharpened their judgments long after her voice was gone, confident in their distance from consequence. Yet betrayal leaves residues that verdicts cannot erase. In the empty chambers where Isabeau once waited out the king's episodes, the walls remember restraint. They remember a queen learning that motherhood does not protect against politics. That blood can be turned into evidence. That survival itself can be reframed as guilt. Her son ruled well. France recovered. History rewarded him. But somewhere beneath the triumph lies a quieter truth, that Isabeau was not overthrown by enemies, but by narrative, by the collective decision that a woman navigating catastrophe must have caused it, by a son who learned too early. That power requires distance even from the woman who gave him life. At night, when Paris grows still and the Seine darkens, the city holds the echo of her footsteps, measured and careful. A queen who did not fall to rebellion or execution, but to erasure, betrayed not by steel, but by memory sharpened into accusation, and so her story endures, unresolved, not as absolution, not as condemnation, but as a warning written softly into stone and frost, that in times of chaos, those who hold the center are often crushed by both sides, and that sometimes the deepest betrayals are carried out not in rage, but in the calm conviction that forgetting is easier than understanding. The first betrayal is often disguised as refuge. A castle door closes, softly at first, with the courtesy of hospitality. Stone does not slam, it seals. Somewhere in the north of England, beneath a sky the color of wet ash, a queen steps inside believing she has outrun the knives of her enemies. She carries a crown that no longer sits upon her head, a lineage older than the walls that receive her, and a faith that her blood will protect her from another woman born to rule. It will not. Mary Stuart, Queen of Scots, had learned early that royalty is a fragile inheritance. Crowned as an infant, raised among the perfumes and tapestries of France, she grew into power as one grows into a midst surrounded by ceremony, shielded from consequence. Her marriage to the French Dauphin placed her briefly at the center of Europe. A young queen crowned twice, admired for beauty and grace, spoken of as destiny made flesh. Then death unraveled the illusion. Widowed and drawn back to Scotland, Mary returned to a land sharpened by reform, suspicion, and men who no longer believed queens were sacred. Her reign became a slow-bleed rebellions, whispered scandals, a husband murdered in the night, another union condemned as treachery. Whether Mary was complicit or merely careless remains buried beneath centuries of accusation. But perception was enough. The nobles rose. The crown was forced from her. Her infant son was crowned in her place. A mother replaced by her child. A queen erased by necessity. Mary fled south, toward England, toward Elizabeth Tudor, her cousin, her rival, her mirror, to queens bound by blood and fear, each watching the other as one watches a shadow that might move. Mary believed in kinship. She believed in mercy between sovereigns. She believed that Elizabeth, who had clawed her own way to survival, would understand the terror of being hunted by one's own realm. Elizabeth understood perfectly, and that was why the gates never reopened. Mary's arrival in England was not announced as imprisonment. It was called protection, a guest of the crown, a queen in residence, but guards lined the halls. Letters were read, rooms were changed without explanation, seasons passed, then years. Castles blurred into one another, Tutbury, Sheffield, Charlie each, colder than the last, each farther from freedom. Elizabeth did not see Mary often. She did not need to. The threat existed without proximity. Mary's bloodline carried a claim stronger than Elizabeth's own to Catholics across Europe. Mary was the true queen of England, wronged by a heretic regime. Plots formed like mold in damp corners, whispers of rescue, marriage, invasion. Some reached Mary's ears, some reached her pen, and every word she wrote became a weapon held against her. Elizabeth hesitated. She delayed. She balanced mercy against survival, knowing that to execute a crowned queen was to fracture the old world beyond repair. Monarchs ruled by divine sanction. If one could be killed by decree, none were safe. Elizabeth wore the crown, but she also wore the memory of her mother, and Boleyn, beheaded by the order of a king. She waited for history to decide for her. History grew impatient. The Babington plot was the turning key. Letters intercepted, codes broken, a promise, or the interpretation of one, that Mary had consented to Elizabeth's death. Whether Mary believed the plot real, whether she spoke from desperation or hope, whether her words were guided into the trap laid for her, these questions echo still, unanswered. Elizabeth signed the warrant reluctantly, or so the record insists. Her hand shook, or so it is written. She blamed advisers. She wept. She raged afterward, claiming betrayal by those who carried out her command. But the ink dried all the same. Mary was told on a gray February morning. She received the sentence with a stillness that startled those present. For 19 years she had lived in suspension, neither free nor condemned, a queen whose life had been paused. Now, finally, there was an ending. She dressed carefully on the morning of her execution. Mary wore velvet the color of dried blood. Beneath it, hidden until the last moment, a gown of red the color of martyrdom. She mounted the scaffold not as a prisoner, but as a sovereign. She forgave her executioners. She prayed aloud in Latin, a language England feared. When the axe fell, it did not fall cleanly. It took 3 blows to sever her head. The crown rolled away from her body. A small dog emerged from her skirts, soaked in blood. Refusing to leave, Elizabeth received the news in silence. She shut herself away. She ordered displays of grief. She punished secretaries. She insisted she had never meant it to happen this way. Yet Mary was gone, and with her, the living challenge to Elizabeth's rule. The betrayal was complete. But betrayal never ends where it begins. Mary's son, James VI of Scotland, would one day inherit the English throne as James I. The bloodline Elizabeth feared would rule England after all. The queen she destroyed would become the mother of kings. History folded in on itself, cruel and symmetrical. Elizabeth ruled on, victorious and alone. She never married. She never named an heir publicly. She learned, as Mary had, that sovereignty is a long vigil against intimacy. To rule is to suspect. To survive is to isolate. In the end, the betrayal between these 2 queens was not personal. It was structural. A world that could not contain 2 women with claims to power forced them into opposition, then into myth. One became the Virgin Queen, the other, the Catholic martyr. Between them lay 19 years of locked doors, unread letters, and a silence thick enough to choke mercy. Castles still stand where Mary waited, their windows narrow and watchful. They remember footsteps that never led outside, They remember a queen who mistook kinship for safety, and another who mistook delay for innocence. At night, when the corridors cool and the past presses close, the stones seem to ask the same quiet question: was the betrayal in the act of execution, or in the years of waiting that made it inevitable? No answer comes, only the sound of a crown, hitting wood once and rolling out of reach. There are betrayals that scream, and there are those that whisper until the whisper becomes the only sound left in the world. In the winter halls of Moscow, beneath icons darkened by centuries of candle smoke, a father raises his hand against the future. Snow presses against the Kremlin walls, muffling the city, as if Russia itself senses what is about to be broken. Power has a pulse here, heavy and relentless, and it beats inside one man alone. Ivan IV is already a legend while he lives. They will call him the Terrible. But in his own time, he is something more frightening: an anointed Tsar who believes himself chosen, betrayed, hunted by God and men alike. Crowned as a child, Ivan grows up surrounded by murder disguised as regency, boyars poison, strangle, and scheme while he watches from behind walls to thin to protect innocence. By the time he claims full power, trust has already died in him. He rolls through fire and prayer. Church bells ring beside executions. Psalms are whispered over mass graves. Ivan builds a state on terror because terror, to him, is the only language loyalty understands. He creates the Oprichnina, a shadow kingdom within Russia, where black-clad riders answer only to him. They ride with dogs' heads and brooms, symbols of sniffing out treason and sweeping it away. Towns are emptied, families erased. Betrayal is assumed before it is proven, and yet, within the palace walls, Ivan dreams of continuity. His sons are not merely children, they are vessels. Each breath they take is weighed against prophecy, each mistake interpreted as fate's judgment. Ivan demands obedience not only to the throne, but to his wounded vision of order. He wants heirs who reflect strength without questioning it, loyalty without hesitation. His eldest surviving son, Ivan Ivanovich, grows into a man shaped by this expectation. He is intelligent, devout, and increasingly disturbed by the blood that stains his father's reign. Where the Tsar sees necessary cruelty, the son sees ruin. Where Ivan the Terrible believes fear preserves the state, Ivan the Younger fears it is hollowing Russia from within. The tension between them is not sudden. It accumulates like frost on stone. By the 1580s, Russia is exhausted. Wars have drained the treasury. Famine stalks the countryside. The people pray for stability, for mercy, for an heir who might soften the future. Ivan Ivanovich becomes that hope, quietly and dangerously. Courtiers look to him with longing. Clergy whisper that he may restore balance. Even silence in such a court is a form of treason. Ivan the Terrible senses it. He has always sensed betrayal before it arrives. In his mind, love and conspiracy are indistinguishable. The closer someone stands, the more dangerous they become. A son is not a comfort. He is a mirror that reflects decay. Each disagreement between them over military decisions, over treatment of nobles, over mercy cuts deeper than open rebellion ever could. The final fracture comes not in council, but in private. One night, Ivan the Terrible storms into his son's chambers. Accounts differ, as they always do when terror stains memory. Some say it was over politics, others over the Tsar's abuse of his pregnant daughter-in-law, whom he had beaten for dressing immodestly. Ivan Ivanovich confronted his father, defending his wife, defying him openly. In Ivan IV's world, defiance is unforgivable. The argument burns quickly, violently. Words become accusations. Accusations become destiny. The Tsar seizes his staff iron-tipped, symbolic of authority, and strikes. Once, the blow lands on his son's temple. The sound is described as dull, final, irreversible. Blood spills onto the floor, where icons watch without blinking. The room falls silent except for Ivan's breath, ragged and animal. His son collapses. The heir to Russia lies broken at his feet, eyes already clouding, life retreating like a tide that will not return. In that instant, the terror becomes something else. Recognition. Ivan the Terrible screams. He gathers his son into his arms, rocking him like an infant, crying out to saints who have long since turned away. He presses his hands to the wound, smearing blood across his beard, across his robes. As if force alone can undo the strike, witnesses will later say the Tsar wailed for days, refusing food, begging for forgiveness from a body that cannot hear him. Ivan Ivanovich dies soon after. Russia watches its future disappear in a single heartbeat. The heir is gone, replaced by a younger son unfit to rule, fragile in mind and body. The dynasty cracks from within. The line Ivan was desperate to protect begins its slow collapse toward the time of troubles, a century of chaos, impostors, famine, and civil war. The betrayal is absolute. A father murders his son not out of hatred, but out of fear shaped into reflex. Power, when hoarded tightly, turns inward. Ivan had spent his life searching for traitors beyond the walls, never noticing how suspicion had colonized his own blood. History immortalizes the moment through art, most famously in Ilya Repin's painting, where Ivan's eyes are wide with horror, clutching his dying son, surrounded by the red of irrevocable loss. It is not a portrait of rage. It is a portrait of realization arriving too late. Afterward, Ivan the Terrible rules on, but something essential has drained from him. He grows quieter, more erratic, haunted by visions, consumed by repentance that brings no absolution. He commissions prayers for his son's soul, endows monasteries, fasts obsessively. None of it restores what was broken. A crown can survive many sins. This one it cannot escape. When Ivan himself dies, collapsed and alone during a game of chess, Russia inherits a legacy of instability born in that single, fatal strike. The son he killed would have ruled differently, perhaps gently, perhaps not. History never grants certainty, but it does mark the moment where a father chose control over continuity, fear over trust. The Kremlin still stands, its walls thick with memory within them. The echo of that blow lingers, not loud, but enduring. A reminder that betrayal does not always come from enemies at the gate. Sometimes it rises from within the hand that believes. It is protecting the realm. In the cold geometry of power, love is often the first casualty, and somewhere beneath the icons and the stone, beneath the prayers whispered for centuries, Russia remembers the night when its future was struck down by the very man who feared losing it most. The candlelight trembles in the corridors of Versailles, as if shivering from the weight of silence. Outside, the same reflects the moon in fragments, silver and sharp, while inside, whispers move faster than courtiers ever could. In France, betrayal wears the guise of family. It smiles, it bends, it reminds the world that the crown is not just a prize, it is a predator, and even those closest to it may feed it without knowing. Louis XIV, the Sun King, has grown tall beneath the opulence of Versailles, his face a mask of confidence and calculation. His court is a stage, the halls a theater where ambition performs daily, and every gesture, every curtsy, every bow must be interpreted for loyalty. Even love is weighed against duty. Nobles learn quickly that proximity to the king is both privilege and peril. The king's brother, Felipe, Duke of Orleans, carries the shadow of envy in his very posture. Less favored by fortune, more mischievous than malevolent, he moves in the spaces between ceremony and solitude, his mind sharp, his intentions hidden behind jest and charm. Felipe is both admired and feared, not for overt rebellion, but for the subtle erosion of trust he inspires with a look, a word, a smile that might conceal plotting. When Louis XIV contracts smallpox as a child, survival is precarious. Court physicians murmur. Prayers are offered, and Felipe is close by, ever present. Some whisper that he watched more than he comforted, that jealousy mingled with duty. But these are shadows cast after the fact. The truth of the heart is rarely legible to the historian. Years later, as Louis ascends fully to the throne, the game of power unfolds. Every alliance must be scrutinized. Every family tie is a thread that can either bind or strangle. Philip's wit charms some, terrifies others, and sometimes, in moments of private reflection, unsettles the king himself. Behind the laughter, the king senses the tension. Loyalty is a mask, and family is often its most convincing disguise. Felipe marries, produces heirs, yet his ambitions do not wane. He is content with influence rather than command, yet influence often has teeth. Advisors whisper, courtiers maneuver, and the Sun King observes carefully. Betrayal need not erupt. In violence, it grows quietly, nourished by doubt and expectation. Louis XIV's later decisions over marriages, appointments, and succession reveal the subtle sting of fraternal envy. Each slight, whether real or imagined, becomes part of a pattern. Felipe is not punished openly. He is watched, measured, allowed to maneuver, a living reminder that in Versailles, love and loyalty are inseparable from fear. Even after Philip's death, stories linger, letters interpreted as subversion, Favors misremembered as betrayal, the shadow of a brother who was never fully trusted. Versailles remembers. History whispers it into gilded walls. The most enduring treasons are those that pass quietly, between blood, and the hardest betrayals are those committed not with swords, but with proximity, patience, and the slow erosion of confidence. In the stillness of the palace, Louis gazes upon the fountains, the sun reflecting endlessly across marble. He rules an empire of elegance, power, and inevitability, yet even he knows, as the night presses closer, that some wounds the ones left by those nearest never truly heal. And in the echo of corridors and gardens, the memory of fraternal betrayal moves silently, as persistent and inevitable as the tide. The morning mist clings to the turrets of Prague like a shroud, softening the sharp edges of a city built on stone, superstition, and whispered loyalties. Within the royal palace, shadows gather in corners where candlelight fails to reach, and corridors carry the weight of unspoken oaths. Bohemia is quiet, but not peaceful. It holds its breath, waiting for the moment when blood might speak louder than crown or counsel. Rudolph II, Holy Roman Emperor, is a man of paradox, brilliant, eccentric, and increasingly unsteady in mind. His court is a labyrinth of scholars, alchemists, and astrologers, each drawn to him by curiosity, ambition, or fear. Prague becomes a city of wonders and whispers, a place where knowledge and madness walk together, and where the line between devotion and conspiracy blurs. The emperor has a brother, Matthias, who watches with measured patience. Matthias is pragmatic where Rudolph drifts, disciplined where Rudolph descends into obsession. He observes, quietly cataloging alliances, noting resentments, feeling the pulse of a court that trembles under Rudolph's eccentricities. Rudolph surrounds himself with curiosities, clocks that measure more than time, mirrors that reflect more than faces, manuscripts promising secrets of life and death. But in attending to the esoteric, he neglects the immediate: his kingdom, his army, his family. As the years pass, anxiety deepens, whispers multiply, and the court becomes a breeding ground for suspicion. Advisors quietly shift their loyalties to Matthias, who projects the steadiness Rudolph cannot maintain. Rudolph, lost in visions of astrological fate and alchemical transformation, fails to notice the slow erosion of power at his own table. Eventually, the moment arrives with subtle inevitability. Matthias asserts authority under the guise of necessity, citing Rudolph's incapacity, his neglect, his obsession. Loyal nobles accept the transition quietly, believing it spares the empire from greater disaster. Rudolph, confronted with the subtle betrayal, is both astonished and strangely acquiescent, a man too absorbed in his own obsessions to fight for what is slipping away. Though Rudolph remains formally emperor for a brief time, Matthias assumes the practical reins of power. Bohemia, Hungary, and Austria acknowledge the shift, and Prague watches as the man who once commanded awe is reduced to observation, a shadow of his former authority. Betrayal has occurred not with sword or poison, but with patience, calculation, and the quiet redirection of loyalty. Rudolph dies years later in isolation, his genius preserved in collections of art and books, but his crown diminished, his authority quietly stolen. Prague remembers the lesson. The most dangerous betrayals are those that unfold over years, carried out by those closest to the throne, who wait silently until opportunity and impatience converge, and in the echoing halls of the palace, the whisper remains: proximity is power, and those nearest can undo you without ever raising a hand. The gates of the Alcazar of Seville swing closed with the sound of inevitability, and the Andalusian air is thick with orange blossoms and smoke. In the courtyards, tiles glint under a sun that seems indifferent to the human dramas unfolding. Beneath it, Spain is poised between reconquest and unity, and in its royal halls, a different war brews, a war of blood, ambition, and fraternal suspicion that no treaty can resolve. King Henry IV of Castile is a man trapped between duty and desire. He ascended the throne young, inheriting a kingdom fatigued by decades of civil unrest. His reign is overshadowed by whispers of illegitimacy and political maneuvering, but he rules with the authority his lineage affords him. Behind closed doors, however, loyalty is never simple. Family here is both anchor and blade. Henry's half-brother, Alfonso, embodies the tension between birthright and expectation. Born of the same blood, yet forever measured against the king, Alfonso grows in stature and influence, quietly absorbing the envy and loyalty of nobles. To the court, he is charming, affable, seemingly content to navigate his subordinate position. But beneath the smiles lies a simmering impatience, a recognition that the crown may be within reach if opportunity rises. The court is a theater of subtle maneuvers. Every marriage, every alliance, every honor granted becomes a calculated signal. Nobles whisper into corners. Spies carry words between halls. Alfonso observes, smiling politely, even as suspicion spreads. He waits as his brother's decisions grow erratic, his favor fleeting, and his patience fraying. Power is slow to hand itself over, but it yields to those willing to wait. Eventually, conflict is inevitable. Alfonso, backed by factions within Castile, challenges Henry's legitimacy, arguing that the king's only daughter cannot secure the succession. Rumors of illegitimacy, forged documents, and whispered scandals circulate like smoke through the palace. The king, already weakened by political enemies and personal insecurities, finds himself betrayed not by foreign invaders, but by the blood nearest to him. Civil war ignites. Nobles split their allegiances, cities declare for one brother, fortresses are seized, and the streets of Castile echo with the uncertainty of divided loyalty. Alfonso's challenge is not merely for power, it is a statement of inevitability. In the calculus of kingship, he is both a product of Henry's lineage and its quiet undoing. Henry IV dies still alive with suspicion, never fully reconciled with the brother who undermined him. Alfonso ascends to the throne as Alfonso XII, the culmination of patience, observation, and the careful exploitation of trust betrayed. In the Alcazar, the tiles still reflect sunlight, and the orange trees bloom each spring. Indifferent to ambition, history remembers the civil strife, the whispered betrayals, and the brother who waited. It leaves behind a lesson carved not in stone, but in human hearts. The most dangerous enemies are often those who share your blood, your home, and your name. And sometimes the crown is won not in battle, but in the silence of expectation fulfilled. The frozen towers of Vienna glimmer under a pale winter sun, and the Danube flows like liquid silver, carrying the weight of centuries past. Inside the Hofburg Palace, whispers coil through gilded corridors, soft as candle smoke yet sharp enough to pierce armor. In the heart of the Habsburg dynasty, power is measured in generations, and loyalty is a fragile ornament that bends under pressure. Here, betrayal does not always arrive with swords. Sometimes it comes in letters, titles, and the careful adjustment of a crown. Ferdinand I, Emperor of the Romans, rules with diligence tempered by caution. His court is vast, sprawling across Europe, yet even such dominion cannot protect a man from the ambitions of his own blood. Ferdinand has children sons who will inherit his name, his lands, his authority. He loves them in the formal ways monarchs are permitted to love. Yet even affection cannot undo the expectations that lineage imposes. Archduke Maximilian, his eldest surviving son, is restless. He is clever, ambitious, and acutely aware of the fragility of his father's attention within the palace. He studies whispers, reads the currents of courtly influence, and navigates the intricate choreography of favor and disfavor. He learns that proximity to the throne is both blessing and threat, that the closer one stands, the more easily power can be wrested away. Tension grows slowly, almost imperceptibly. Ferdinand delegates authority, trusts advisors, and attempts to secure alliances across Europe, but every decision leaves space for suspicion. Maximilian's presence becomes a quiet test of loyalty. Small disagreements over policy or marriage alliances escalate into rumors of dissent. Courtiers begin to hedge their words, calculating where favor lies. The breaking point comes not in open confrontation, but in opportunity. Ferdinand is weakened by illness, constrained by diplomacy, and increasingly relying on advisors. Maximilian asserts himself with patience, claiming duties in his father's name, subtly undermining decisions, and positioning himself as indispensable to the empire's stability. What appears to be filial obedience masks a careful orchestration of authority. By the time Ferdinand dies, Maximilian has effectively consolidated power. Though the outward appearance of respect is maintained, the transition is bloodless, yet no less complete. The son has eclipsed the father, not with treachery overt, but with the subtle accumulation of influence and the quiet exploitation of trust. Vienna remembers the lesson in silence. Betrayal is not always loud. Sometimes it is the patient, invisible shift of loyalty, the careful timing of action, and the way power can be claimed without a blade. Within the walls of the Hofburg, the echo lingers. Blood may connect, but ambition often divides. and even the closest heir can become the architect of a father's quiet undoing. The morning fog drapes itself over the stone walls of Edinburgh Castle, softening the jagged outlines of battlements and towers, yet carrying with it the chill of centuries-old secrets. In the halls that have seen kings crowned and executed, whispers linger like cobwebs, delicate but persistent, reaching into every corner where light barely touches. Scotland is a land of fierce loyalty and fiercer suspicion, and nowhere is that tension more dangerous than within a royal family. James III of Scotland ascended the throne as a boy, his crown heavy and his councillors heavier still. The kingdom, still raw from wars of succession and unrest, demands stability, yet the king's own temperament betrays him. He is gentle where ruthlessness is expected, cautious where decisiveness is prized. His advisors murmur constantly, each word a subtle test of fidelity. Even family cannot be fully trusted. Among those closest to him is his son, James, Prince of Scotland, a boy growing into a young man as impatient as he is shrewd. The prince observes the court with sharp eyes, noting every favor given and denied, every alliance formed and undermined. He sees his father's hesitation, the weakness in a crown that trembles under expectation, and he begins to understand that in monarchy, patience is both virtue and peril, sometimes for the ruler, sometimes for the heir. The prince is not malicious, but ambition is a quiet teacher. It whispers in the empty corridors, in the pauses of conversation, in the eyes of courtiers who already weigh the future against the present. He questions his father's decisions, challenges policies, and slowly draws support from nobles frustrated by James III's perceived softness. What begins as concern becomes opposition, masked in respect but fueled by impatience and fear of inadequacy. Civil strife blooms quietly at first, then spreads. Rebellion simmers among barons, encouraged by the prince's subtle manipulations. The king finds himself surrounded not by enemies at the gate, but by those whose loyalty was assumed, then quietly redirected. Battles erupt in the north, alliances fracture, and Edinburgh watches as the son positions himself as both defender and critic, protector and usurper. The climax comes near Stirling, where a confrontation between father and son is inevitable. Accounts vary, but James III dies amid chaos, betrayed not by invaders, but by the very blood he raised. The prince ascends, officially crowned James IV, yet the shadow of filicide intentional or circumstantial lingers in every chronicle. Edinburgh Castle endures, silent witness to the transfer of power and the quiet, inevitable betrayal that sometimes resides in the closest of hearts. In Scotland, history murmurs a lesson: kings may rule a kingdom, but they cannot always command loyalty from those who share their blood. Ambition, patient and precise, can rewrite legacies, and even a father's crown may be claimed by the son he nurtured. The sun dips behind the jagged peaks of the Apennines, casting long shadows over the hilltop town of Urbino. The stone streets curl like ancient secrets, and within the ducal palace, corridors stretch in a labyrinth of marble and frescoes, carrying whispers of ambition, jealousy, and quiet betrayal. Italy is a patchwork of principalities, each ruled with vigilance and suspicion, and in Urbino, the ducal family learns that loyalty is a fragile currency, easily spent and quickly withdrawn. Federico di Montefeltro, Duke of Urbino, is a man of vision, renowned for his military prowess, his patronage of the arts, and his measured intellect. He governs with a combination of discipline and charm. His court is a center of learning, drawing scholars, artists, and courtiers who are dazzled by the light of his ambition. Yet even in this brilliance, shadows gather, shadows that begin with the closest of kin. Guidobaldo, his son and heir, grows within the palace walls under the weight of expectation. He is trained in war and diplomacy, in art and literature, molded to inherit not just a title, but a legacy. Yet the father, in his relentless pursuit of perfection and control, leaves little room for affection. The son begins to chafe against invisible bonds, feeling both the blessing and burden of blood. Loyalty is not freely given. It is coursed through observation, through rules, through the constant shaping of a mind that must always anticipate the father's will. The first fractures are subtle: disagreements over alliances, over military campaigns, over the distribution of wealth and favor. Courtiers sense the tension and adjust accordingly. The young duke learns that obedience is a mask. The real path to influence is to wait, to maneuver, to anticipate opportunities that the father may overlook. Ambition becomes a patient teacher, guiding him toward decisions that will eventually unsettle the very foundation of his inheritance. When Federico falls ill, the court watches with a mixture of anxiety and calculation. Death is inevitable. Yet the timing and manner of succession can be influenced. Guidobaldo steps forward, asserting authority in matters his father can no longer oversee, presenting himself as both caretaker and rightful heir. Every move is measured, every word deliberate. Friends and enemies alike align with him, sensing that power has shifted silently but completely. Federico dies with dignity, unaware or perhaps unwilling to recognize that the structures he built have been quietly co-opted. Guidobaldo inherits not only the title, but also the courtly networks and alliances, achieving what he had long been prepared for: command without conflict, victory without overt rebellion. The ducal palace remains, its frescoes vibrant, its corridors echoing with footsteps and whispers. Yet within its stones lies the memory of a subtle betrayal, one carried out not by violence, but by patience, observation, and the quiet assertion of ambition. In Urbino, history murmurs, even the most devoted heir may become the instrument of a father's undoing, and blood does not guarantee loyalty, only opportunity. The early morning fog drapes over the walls of the Tower of London, softening its jagged edges, yet the stones seem to hum with centuries of secrets, betrayals, and whispered plots. In the dim corridors, the echoes of footsteps blend with the distant tolling of bells, and the air is thick with anticipation. For history remembers some betrayals more vividly than others. Henry VIII, King of England, rules with both force and charm. A monarch as capable of seduction as he is of rage. His court is a stage where every gesture carries weight, every glance is a calculation, and loyalty is constantly measured. But even a king, surrounded by advisors, courtiers, and favorites, can fall victim to the ambitions of those closest to him. Among those closest is Thomas Cromwell, a man who rose from obscurity to the king's inner circle. Cromwell's intellect is unmatched, his ambition relentless, and his loyalty carefully calibrated. He is the architect behind monumental shifts: the Reformation, the dissolution of monasteries, the reordering of England itself. Yet the very proximity that grants him influence also plants the seeds of suspicion. For Henry, power is never merely administrative, it is deeply personal, entwined with the assertion of his will, his desires, and his legacy. Cromwell's downfall begins with subtle shifts. He negotiates alliances, enforces laws, and challenges entrenched traditions, all in the name of the king's vision. Yet Henry's favor is a flame that flickers with personal sentiment, and, of Cleves, the politically arranged queen, fails to charm Henry as expected, and Cromwell's role in the marriage arrangement becomes a weapon wielded by those who envy him. Rivals whisper, accusing him of incompetence, of overstepping, of betraying. The king not in loyalty to a foreign power, but an ambition that may outstrip his own master. The king's anger grows. Cromwell's past successes are erased in a heartbeat, replaced by suspicion and resentment. Letters are intercepted, false claims are circulated, and the machinery of betrayal accelerates silently, efficiently. The king's court, once obedient, now conspires in plain sight, each noble eager to curry favor by pointing the blame elsewhere. Cromwell is arrested, stripped of title and honor, and condemned to execution on the scaffold at Tower Hill. He walks with composure, a man who had served a king and a country only to be betrayed by proximity. The axe falls, and the king's influence is reaffirmed. But the lesson lingers. In the halls of power, betrayal is rarely loud. It creeps, calculated and patient, often born of the very ambition a ruler cultivates in those he trusts most. The tower itself remains patient and silent, a witness to countless acts of devotion and treachery, and in its shadow, England remembers that sometimes the most devastating betrayal is not by a foreign army, but by the hand that once promised loyalty closest to your own throne. The night in the French Alps is cold, crystalline, and absolute, as if the mountains themselves have conspired to hold secrets beneath their frozen peaks. Within the Chateau d'Ibois, the corridors wind like a serpent, gilded and echoing, yet carrying the weight of unease. France is poised on the brink of change, and within its royal walls, betrayal often blooms quietly, nurtured by ambition, fear, and envy, sometimes among those who call themselves family. Henry II of France ascends the throne as a young man, handsome, vigorous, and surrounded by advisors eager to influence his rule. The king is confident, charismatic, and fearless, but even courage cannot shield him from the machinations that dwell in proximity. His court is a theater of intrigue, a place where affection and loyalty intertwine with calculation and self-preservation, where every smile can conceal a dagger sharpened by ambition. Catherine de' Medici, the Queen, stands at the center of this delicate balance. She is intelligent, patient, and acutely aware of the precariousness of her position. Married to Henry, she is both mother and mediator, her own authority constantly tested by the whims of a king and the ambitions of their children. Yet in this court, even maternal guidance is a form of influence that can be misinterpreted, manipulated, or condemned. The first fractures appear in subtle ways. The king's eldest sons, Francis, Charles, and Henry, grow restless, each vying for favor and opportunity. Courtiers fan the flames, emphasizing slights and perceived betrayals. Decisions over alliances, marriages, and military campaigns become arenas for tension. The son's ambitions, tempered by the queen's counsel, sometimes clash with the king's vision, creating rifts that deepen with each passing year. The tragic culmination emerges in the events surrounding the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572. The royal family, entangled in political and religious alliances, navigates a court where Protestant and Catholic loyalties collide violently. Catherine, seeking to preserve her dynasty and her children's power, orchestrates a plan to eliminate perceived threats. Thousands die in Paris under the cover of night, but the personal betrayal is intimate. Family, allies, and courtiers are sacrificed to secure the future of her sons. The king, caught in the crosscurrents of politics and affection, must reconcile with the choices made by those closest to him, decisions that blur the line between protection and treachery. Henry II dies unexpectedly from a jousting injury, leaving his sons under the guidance and manipulation of their mother. Catherine wields influence with calculated precision, yet history remembers the bloodshed and whispers of betrayal. The lesson endures. In royal families, protection can become subjugation, guidance can become manipulation, and the closest relationships may conceal the most devastating betrayals. In the silent corridors of Blois, the shadows linger, recalling the king who fell from grace not by enemy sword, but by the intricate, relentless politics of blood, ambition, and maternal calculation. The palace remembers, even as centuries pass, that in the game of crowns, loyalty is always negotiable, and even family can wield the sharpest knife. The fog rolls across the rugged hills of Bavaria, settling over the stone walls of Munich like a shroud, damp and persistent. Inside the residence palace, the tapestries seem to absorb the whispers, and the corridors echo with the quiet weight of expectation. In the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, where crowns and titles intertwine like tangled vines, betrayal often grows not from enemies abroad, but from the hands meant to nurture and guide. Maximilian I, Elector of Bavaria, is a ruler of ambition and discipline. His intellect is measured, his piety visible. Yet even the most prudent sovereign cannot command the hearts of those closest to him. His court is a place of calculated allegiances, where nobles observe, advise, and sometimes maneuver for advantage while remaining outwardly loyal. Blood does not guarantee fidelity. Among those nearest is his son, Albert V, a young man trained in the art of governance, diplomacy, and religious observance. Albert grows under his father's watchful eye, learning the subtle interplay between authority and subservience. Yet proximity carries its own danger. The son perceives not only the responsibilities of rulership, but also the limitations imposed by the father's vigilance. Patience becomes strategy, compliance, a mask for careful observation. Tension emerges quietly. Albert begins to assert influence over court decisions, advocating for policies that subtly counter his father's preferences. Advisors notice the shift and reposition themselves. Swayed by the promise of favor from the heir apparent, Maximilian observes, wary but hesitant to interfere, aware that overt confrontation risks fracturing the very unity he has worked to preserve. As years pass, the shift becomes undeniable. Albert's influence consolidates, allies accrue, and his vision for Bavaria grows increasingly independent of his father's guidance. Maximilian dies, leaving Albert to inherit not just the title, but the courtly networks, alliances, and political momentum carefully nurtured in his shadow. The transition is smooth, almost bloodless, yet it bears the quiet signature of filial ambition that has edged past paternal authority. The residence remains, its halls and chambers echoing with the subtle legacy of that calculated rise. History recalls not a violent rebellion, but a betrayal of proximity, one carried out not with swords or poison, but with patience, observation, and the gradual accumulation of influence. In Bavaria, the lesson is enduring. Even the closest heir, nurtured and guided, can become the instrument of a father's quiet undoing. And blood alone cannot safeguard loyalty in the intricate dance of crowns. The narrow streets of Madrid glimmer under the soft wash of evening light, and the walls of the royal Alcazar rise like silent witnesses to centuries of ambition, ceremony, and concealed resentments. Spain is a kingdom of grandeur and ritual, but within its royal walls, even blood is a precarious tether. Here, betrayal often arrives not with swords or open defiance, but with patience, calculation, and the quiet erosion of trust. Philip II, King of Spain, is a ruler of formidable intellect and exacting standards. His court is meticulous, ceremonial, and suffused with piety. Yet even a monarch so disciplined cannot fully anticipate the ambitions of those nearest. The king's family, tasked with preserving lineage and legacy, carries its own subtle currents of tension. Children, advisors, and relatives alike navigate a delicate lattice of expectation and scrutiny, aware that proximity to power is both privilege and danger. Among these figures is Philip's son, Don Carlos, Prince of Asturias. Brilliant, impetuous, and deeply emotional, Carlos is a youth caught between devotion and resentment. Trained in the arts of diplomacy and governance, he is expected to embody his father's discipline. Yet temperament and circumstance clash. He perceives both the weight of the crown and the suffocating expectations placed upon him. And slowly, an inner turbulence begins to reshape his loyalty. The first fractures are subtle, disagreements over court appointments, disputes over policy. The prince's sharp criticisms disguised as concern. Courtiers sense the tension and begin to position themselves strategically. Alliances shift quietly, whispers grow. Don Carlos's impatience clashes with Philip's rigidity, each disagreement magnified by observation, fear, and the pressure of expectation. The court becomes a mirror reflecting ambition, resentment, and the inevitability of familial conflict. Tensions erupt into tragedy. In 1568, Don Carlos is accused of plotting against his father, of conspiring to usurp the throne. Though historians debate the extent of his guilt, whether the accusations are true or a political instrument wielded to assert control, the prince is imprisoned, confined in conditions designed to break both body and spirit. Philip maintains the guise of justice and paternal concern, yet the act is a quiet, devastating betrayal. Father against son, crown against blood. Don Carlos dies within the walls of confinement, young and broken, leaving Spain with a legacy of unease. Philip continues to rule, yet the shadow of this filial fracture endures, whispered in corridors, chronicled by historians, and reflected in the somber halls of the Alcazar. The most painful betrayals, history reminds us, are often those enacted, quietly, patiently, by those who stand closest, bound by blood and trust. In Madrid, the walls still remember love and loyalty can coexist with ambition. But when the crown is at stake, even family can wield the sharpest instrument of betrayal. The mist clings to the towers of Naples as though the city itself is hesitant to reveal the secrets it has carried for generations. Streets wind like serpents beneath the shadow of Mount Vesuvius. And within the Castel Nuovo, the walls absorb the whispers of courtiers and family alike. Here, in the heart of southern Italy, betrayal often wears the softest mask, carried not by swords, but by subtle maneuvering, expectation, and the fragile bonds of blood. Ferdinand I of Naples, a king tempered by political upheaval and dynastic pressure, rules with a careful eye and measured hand. His court is a tapestry of alliances, rivalries, and whispered ambitions, a place where a single word or glance can ripple into consequences that endure for decades. He governs with prudence, yet even the most disciplined monarch cannot anticipate the quiet revolts of the heart. Within his own family, his eldest son, Alfonso II, grows in the palace shadows, schooled in diplomacy, military strategy, and the rituals of succession. Yet proximity to the crown brings not only education, but scrutiny and restriction. Alfonso's talents are observed and measured, his independence constrained, and slowly, a sense of resentment and ambition blooms within him. Loyalty becomes complicated by opportunity, and filial affection entwines uneasily with the desire to claim what is rightfully his. Tension unfolds subtly over years. Disagreements over appointments, territorial administration, and courtly influence create small fissures. Courtiers, ever attentive to power, amplify the unrest, positioning themselves in anticipation of a shift. Alfonso's patience is deliberate. He observes his father's decisions, learning where deference is necessary and where subtle assertion can advance his influence. The palace becomes a stage for a quiet but inexorable power struggle. When Ferdinand ages and his rule falters under political pressures and illness, Alfonso steps forward, asserting authority under the guise of necessity and care for the kingdom. The transition is swift but understated. No battle is fought, yet the father's authority is quietly eroded. Ferdinand dies, leaving Alfonso in command, the culmination of patient ambition realized. The Castel Nuovo endures, its halls echoing with the silent marks of this family betrayal. History remembers not an open conflict, but a slow, deliberate reordering of loyalty and influence. In Naples, the lesson persists. Even the hand that guides a child can be subtly overtaken by ambition. At blood, the binding cannot prevent betrayal when opportunity and patience converge. The dawn rises over the jagged hills of Transylvania, casting long shadows across stone walls and narrow streets, and the morning air carries the chill of centuries-old secrets. Within the halls of the princely court, whispers coil like smoke, winding through corridors where the tapestries absorb every subtle movement, every glance weighted with intent. Here, in a land shaped by war, superstition, and dynastic struggle, betrayal often wears the guise of loyalty, and the closest of kin can become the most dangerous adversaries. Vlad III, later known to history as Vlad the Impaler, rules Wallachia with a mixture of ferocity, cunning, and an unshakable sense of destiny. His court is a place of paradox. Elegance and cruelty coexist. Advisors and nobles navigate favor and suspicion, and loyalty is tested in ways that surpass the ordinary bounds of obedience. Even those born to serve and support him must constantly negotiate the precarious balance between duty and survival. Among these figures stands his younger brother, Radu, whose own claim to authority and influence is subtle, measured, and patient. Radu's presence is unassuming, yet deliberate. He observes the court, notes alliances, and quietly cultivates favor with the Ottomans, the very power against which Wallachia struggles. While Vlad's rule is marked by terror and uncompromising assertion of dominance, Radu's approach is strategic, indirect, and almost imperceptible, an influence that grows like frost across stone, slowly, relentlessly. As Vlad imposes strict justice and cruel punishments upon those perceived as disloyal, Radu maneuvers carefully, winning allies and building networks of support outside the immediate circle of power. The prince becomes the instrument of his own brother's isolation, not through open rebellion, but by cultivating the perception that Vlad's authority is contested and fragile. Wallach's nobles, fearful of Vlad's ruthlessness yet tempted by Radu's diplomacy, begin to shift allegiances. Quietly, imperceptibly, the ultimate fracture occurs as Vlad is captured by the Ottomans, a consequence of betrayal, strategic missteps, and political intrigue. Radu is installed as a ruler more amenable to Ottoman influence, his ascent facilitated by careful positioning and patience. Vlad returns later to reclaim power, but the period of exile marks the first subtle triumph of fraternal betrayal. Blood-bound by loyalty has been repurposed into opportunity. The citadel walls remain, their stones silent witnesses to the slow calculus of ambition, fear, and kinship. In the Chronicles of Transylvania, historians and storytellers alike recall that even the fiercest and most uncompromising leaders can be undone not by enemies at the gate, but by the quiet, calculated maneuvering of the family they trust most. Shadows linger in the corridors, reminding all who walk them proximity and blood are powerful, but patience, cunning, and ambition can turn them into instruments of betrayal. The morning mist hangs heavy over the canals of Venice, curling through narrow alleys and reflecting silver light off the rippling water. The Dog's Palace rises above the Grand Canal, its marble walls smooth and unyielding, yet within, the air vibrates with the quiet tension of a city built on commerce, diplomacy, and ancient rivalries. Here, among the gilded halls and echoing chambers, betrayal is not always loud. It moves softly, measured, and always from those closest to power. Doge Francesco Foscari rules Venice with an eye toward expansion, commerce, and the preservation of the Republic's delicate balance. His reign is marked by conflict with Milan, internal disputes among the noble families, and a relentless effort to maintain Venice's supremacy in trade and politics. Though a master of strategy and governance, Francesco cannot foresee that the threat to his authority may rise from within his own household. Lucretia, His daughter is often overlooked in histories that favor men, yet her presence in the court is both significant and perilous. Her marriages and alliances are manipulated to serve the political ambitions of her father. Yet the pressures of duty, family loyalty, and personal desire collide in ways that create subtle fractures. Francesco's sons, Niccolo and Jacopo, are similarly caught between filial duty and the competing forces of ambition, expectation, and fear of losing favor. The seeds of betrayal grow slowly, almost imperceptibly. Niccolo is accused of corruption and of conspiring with Milanese agents, charges amplified by rival nobles who seek to exploit the family's internal tensions. The Doge, caught between love for his son and his duty to the Republic, struggles to navigate the accusations. Political necessity forces Francesco to act against his own blood. Jacopo's fate is equally fraught. His loyalty is constantly measured, his actions scrutinized, until every decision he makes is shadowed by suspicion. Francesco is eventually compelled to preside over the exile of his own son, Niccolo, a decision that pierces both his conscience and his authority. The Venetian Republic, ever patient, observes the unfolding of familial strife with solemn detachment. Codifying the betrayal into law and tradition, Francesco's grief is silent, his love constrained by duty, leaving the Doge a man who rules with wisdom, but is haunted by the intimate cost of power. Venice endures, its canals flowing timelessly beneath stone bridges, its palaces reflecting light and shadow alike. History remembers Francesco Foscari not merely as a ruler, but as a father who, bound by oath and circumstance, turned against his own blood in the hushed corridors of the Dog's Palace. The lesson remains. Sometimes the harshest betrayals come not from enemies abroad, but from the delicate balance of duty, ambition, and family, the invisible currents that shape the fate of a dynasty. The cold wind sweeps across the stone ramparts of the Château d'Ivoire, rustling tapestries that have long absorbed the whispers of court intrigue within its halls. The scent of candle wax mingles with that of parchment, and every footstep echoes like a question: who can be trusted when loyalty is measured not by affection, but by ambition? France, at the height of Renaissance elegance and turmoil, teaches that even blood can become a weapon. King Francis I ascends the throne with brilliance, charm, and a vision for France that encompasses art, conquest, and diplomacy. His court dazzles with splendor, music, poetry, and learning flourish beneath the shadow of political and military tension. Yet behind every smile, every curtsy, lies an unspoken calculus. Family is rarely merely comfort. It is a test, a tool, and occasionally a threat. Among those closest to the king is his elder son, Henry, the Dauphin. Raised amid the grandeur of Blois and Fontainebleau, Henry is instructed in the arts of diplomacy, warfare, and statesmanship, but he is also keenly aware of the weight of expectation to embody the glory of his father, to navigate courtly ambitions, and to secure a legacy for France's future. The pressure grows silently, like frost across the gardens at dawn, and with it, the subtle stirrings of resentment and impatience. Tensions begin with trifles, disagreements over alliances, perceived favoritism, the careful distribution of patronage and responsibility. Courtiers note Henry's growing assertiveness, whispering that the prince questions decisions, challenges authority, and seeks influence beyond his station. Francis, brilliant but human, oscillates between indulgence and reprimand, failing to perceive the slow shift of loyalty and ambition. The climax arrives amid the political and religious upheavals of 16th century France. Henry begins to act decisively, consolidating power and forming networks of influence that, while legal and strategic, increasingly circumvent his father's authority. Family council becomes a stage for subtle conflict. Even love is shadowed by ambition. The king's judgments are quietly questioned, his commands carefully navigated, and the court realigns itself around the emerging power of the heir. Francis dies still presiding over a court in which authority has been quietly challenged and redefined. Henry ascends, a crown gained not through open rebellion, but through patient strategy and the delicate exploitation of proximity. The shadow endures, its halls a testament to power and intimacy intertwined, where the lessons are written not in bloodshed alone, but in the subtle, unspoken betrayals that only family can enact. History remembers, in royal bloodlines, ambition often moves quietly, and those closest may be both heir and undoer. The sun dips low over the jagged cliffs of Scotland, casting a long shadow across Stirling Castle, where stone walls have witnessed generations of kings, queens, and conspiracies. The air is sharp with the scent of peat and mist, carrying the hush of secrets that cannot be spoken aloud. Here, in the heart of a kingdom forged in war and negotiation, betrayal often comes not from enemies beyond the gates, but from the very blood meant to protect the crown. James V ascends the Scottish throne as a boy, inheriting a kingdom still scarred by rebellion and factional rivalries. His rule is guided by tutors, advisors, and regents, each with their own agendas. But even their counsel cannot prepare him for the subtler lessons of family. Loyalty, James learns, is not guaranteed by love or proximity. It is fragile, mutable, and often dictated by ambition. Among those closest is his mother, Margaret Tudor, widow of James IV and daughter of Henry VII of England. She is a woman of intelligence and grace, yet her position is precarious. As Queen Mother and Regent, she must navigate the treacherous waters of Scottish politics, balancing the expectations of nobles with the needs of her son. Her own ambitions and the desire to secure alliances with England complicate matters, and the young king becomes increasingly aware that even those who claim to protect him may advance their own agendas. The court grows tense. Nobles align themselves with factions, whispers fill corridors, and the young king witnesses disputes between advisors and family alike. Margaret's influence, though protective in intent, is interpreted by some as manipulation. Her guidance, a form of subtle coercion. James, intelligent and perceptive, begins to assert his own will, yet the shadow of his mother's presence looms over every decision, every alliance. The culmination is inevitable. James matures into a ruler determined to claim authority for himself. Yet he cannot entirely escape the legacy of familial influence. Decisions that should be clear-cut are complicated by past alliances, unspoken expectations, and the careful, quiet maneuvering of those nearest. Margaret, for her part, watches as her son consolidates power, her intentions both protective and self-serving, a duality that defines the delicate balance of royal family life. History remembers James V not only for his reign, but for the intimate tensions of blood, loyalty, and ambition that shaped it. In Stirling Castle, the stones themselves seem to murmur. Even the closest kin can wield the most profound power over a ruler's fate, and betrayal is sometimes carried quietly in counsel, care, and proximity, rather than in open revolt. In Scotland, the lesson lingers like mist. Blood binds, but it can also undo. The morning sun glints off the towers of the Kremlin, casting long, golden lines across Moscow's frozen courtyards. The chill in the air carries the scent of pine, stone, and the faint smoke of distant hearths. Yet within these walls, warmth is scarce and trust scarcer still. Russia is a land ruled as much by intrigue as by law, and in the heart of the Tsar's family, ambition often moves quietly, leaving betrayal in its silent wake. Ivan IV, later known as Ivan the Terrible, ascends to the throne as a boy, inheriting a realm both vast and fractious. His early years are marked by the death of parents, regency struggles, and the constant pressure of nobles whose loyalty is as shifting as the Russian snows. Ivan grows under suspicion, his mind sharpened by fear and necessity, learning that the throne is a prize that even blood may covet. Among those closest is his cousin, Vladimir Strutsky, once considered a potential heir by the Boycer's advisors. Vladimir is cultured, intelligent, and careful, a prince who navigates the treacherous currents of court life with patience and charm. Yet proximity to power is a double-edged sword. As Ivan consolidates authority, the existence of a relative with a legitimate claim becomes both a potential ally and a looming threat. Loyalty is measured not by affection, but by opportunity and survival. The tension grows slowly. Imperceptibly, letters are intercepted, counsel is manipulated, and Vladimir is suddenly undermined by those seeking favor with the increasingly unpredictable. Tsar rumors swirl. Some whisper that Vladimir seeks the throne. Others claim he is loyal beyond doubt. Ivan, ever vigilant and increasingly ruthless, begins to see shadows in every smile, plots behind every gesture. Ultimately, the quiet struggle erupts into decisive betrayal. Vladimir is accused of conspiracy against the Tsar, imprisoned, and pressured into submission. His life, once vibrant with promise, is extinguished not by battlefield, but by proximity. The closeness that once granted status now becomes his undoing. Ivan secures his rule, yet the court remembers the lesson etched in fear and blood. Power within the family is never guaranteed. Ambition can quietly grow in the shadows of affection. The Kremlin endures, its walls patient and eternal. History whispers through its corridors that in Russia, the sharpest betrayals are often carried out by those closest to the throne, who wield blood and loyalty as tools of survival. Even the most formidable ruler is vulnerable to the subtle ambition of kin, and the lesson remains chillingly clear. Proximity and love do not inoculate one against betrayal. They can ensure it. The chill of early morning drifts through the towering walls of the Palace of Versailles, settling over gilded halls and marble floors like a thin, suffocating fog. Candlelight flickers against painted ceilings, casting shadows that seem to stretch and twist with every breath. France is a kingdom of elegance and ceremony. Yet beneath its beauty lurks a dangerous truth. Even blood is not always loyal, and the closest family members may harbor ambitions darker than any enemy at the gates. Louis XIII, King of France, ascends the throne as a boy, his reign immediately overshadowed by regents, nobles, and the heavy hand of his mother, Marie de Medici. His childhood is marked by observation, education, and careful instruction in the art of rule. Yet every lesson carries an unspoken warning. Proximity to power can be both a blessing and a trap. The corridors of Versailles, though yet unbuilt in his youth, find their echo in the court's culture, a world where loyalty is currency and betrayal is often disguised as counsel. The figure of greatest subtle influence is his own mother, Marie, a queen regent. She governs with grace, intelligence, and unwavering attention to opportunity. Yet her guidance is not always selfless. She cultivates alliances, secures favors, and positions her favorites within the young king's court, ensuring that her influence endures even as her son matures. To Louis XIII, the line between care and manipulation is thin, and the lessons of loyalty are learned in whispers and glances rather than in open confrontation. Tensions rise. As Louis grows into manhood, advisors murmur, nobles maneuver, and the king begins to assert his authority. Marie, unwilling to relinquish control entirely, fosters subtle resistance among court factions, undermining her son's decisions without overt rebellion. Policies are challenged in private councils, recommendations are delayed, and the young king learns that even familial affection can carry the sting of betrayal. The climax is a slow, quiet unraveling of trust. Louis XIII ultimately removes his mother from power, asserting his authority while maintaining outward respect. Marie retreats, her influence diminished, yet the shadow of her ambitions remains imprinted on the court. Her subtle manipulations have taught the king lessons in vigilance, suspicion, and the delicate balance of familial power. Versailles, even centuries later, seems to remember. Its halls whisper the enduring truth. Proximity does not equal loyalty, and the closest bonds, those of blood and parentage, can conceal the most potent and enduring betrayals. Even love, when mixed with ambition, becomes a weapon in the theater of power. The morning sun rises over the snow-dusted ramparts of Stockholm, casting pale light across the frozen waters of the surrounding archipelago. The walls of the royal palace absorb centuries of intrigue, plotting, and the quiet tension of succession, each stone a witness to the ambitions that fester within the family. In Sweden, the crown carries not just power, but expectation and often betrayal, delivered by those nearest to the throne. King Gustav I, known as Gustav Vasa, rules with iron determination, having liberated Sweden from Danish control and established a dynasty meant to endure. His reign is marked by vision, reform, and the careful consolidation of authority. Yet even a king who has wrested independence from foreign oppressors cannot fully guard against disloyalty within his own bloodline. Family, it seems, is both sanctuary and battlefield. Among those closest is his son, Eric XIV. A young prince of intelligence, charm, and growing ambition. Eric is tutored in governance, diplomacy, and military strategy, yet he is also raised in the shadow of his father's exacting standards and the complex web of alliances Gustav has built. In proximity to the crown, Eric learns that patience is both a tool and a weapon. One must wait for opportunity, observe closely, and act decisively when the moment arrives. The first signs of tension emerge subtly. Eric's decisions are scrutinized, his ambitions quietly questioned, and courtiers begin to align themselves with his father or his rising influence. Disagreements over policy, marriage, and succession create small fissures, amplified by those eager to manipulate the future of the kingdom. Each courtly smile, each deferential gesture, carries the weight of hidden agendas. As Gustav ages, the balance of power shifts imperceptibly. Eric positions himself carefully, cultivating loyalty, consolidating influence, and preparing to assert authority over matters previously dominated by his father. When Gustav dies, the transition is seamless in appearance but profound in consequence. The son, who has waited patiently, inherits not just a crown, but the full machinery of power his father once wielded. Yet the shadow of betrayal lingers. Eric's ambition, honed in the corridors of his father's court, foreshadows the paranoia and ruthlessness that will mark his own reign. The palace itself seems to murmur the lesson of history. In Sweden, as elsewhere, proximity and blood are no shield against ambition. Trust within a royal family is fragile. Patience can mask calculation, and sometimes the hand that nurtures can also dismantle, quietly and inexorably, the very authority it once served. The morning mist curls over the winding streets of Vienna, softening the spires and towers of the Hofburg Palace, yet within its walls, the air is thick with quiet tension and the weight of unspoken schemes. Austria is a land of dynastic precision, where crowns and alliances are carefully measured, yet even in such disciplined courts, betrayal often arises from those whose blood is closest. Here, family and ambition intertwine with a subtle, sometimes deadly rhythm. Emperor Ferdinand II, a man of strict discipline, devout faith, and political cunning, rules the Habsburg dominions with authority tempered by vigilance. His court is meticulously arranged. Advisors, generals, and diplomats navigate protocol and precedent, and loyalty is constantly assessed. Even a ruler as shrewd as Ferdinand learns, over decades, that the threats most dangerous often do not come from foreign armies, but from those within the family circle. Among those nearest is his own brother, Maximilian, whose presence in the court is both a resource and a threat. Maximilian is intelligent, calculating, and patient, fully aware of the precarious balance of power between them. While Ferdinand oversees the consolidation of imperial authority, Maximilian observes, waits, and subtly positions himself, leveraging alliances, and whispers without ever overtly challenging the emperor's rule. His ambition is quiet, like frost forming on stone, slow, imperceptible, and inevitable. Tensions emerge gradually. Policy disputes, ceremonial precedents, and the distribution of honors become small battlegrounds for influence. Advisors and nobles shift allegiances, sensing the subtle shift of power, while Ferdinand grows increasingly wary of the ambition. In his own household, each council meeting, each decree, carries the latent tension of trust measured against self-interest. Ultimately, Maximilian does not strike with force, but with careful patience. Upon Ferdinand's death, the transition of power is largely unopposed. Yet it is a triumph of subtlety. The brother who quietly navigated the currents of loyalty and ambition now assumes full authority, demonstrating that betrayal need not roar to be complete. The Hofburg endures, its corridors and halls echoing centuries of council, intrigue, and quiet recalibration of power. History records the lesson. In dynasties, the closest blood may be the sharpest instrument. Patience can become strategy, and betrayal is often woven not in open defiance, but in the meticulous, patient assertion of ambition within the family. In Vienna, the walls seem to whisper, trust cautiously, even among those who share your name. The winter sun glints off the frozen towers of Prague, casting long shadows over the Gothic spires of the Hrabkany Castle. Mist drifts through the courtyards, curling like smoke, and the air is thick with the scent of candle wax, ink, and coal. Stone Bohemia is a land of intrigue, alliances, and dynastic maneuvering, and within the walls of its royal palace, betrayal often wears the guise of care, counsel, or familial affection. Here, even blood cannot guarantee loyalty. Rudolf II, Holy Roman Emperor and King of Bohemia, inherits a realm of immense complexity, a patchwork of noble houses, religious tensions, and distant vassals all demanding attention. He is a man of intellect and obsession, fascinated by alchemy, astronomy, and the esoteric arts. Yet his brilliance cannot shield him from the ambitions of those nearest. His court is a fragile ecosystem where loyalty is transactional, and family can be the sharpest threat to a ruler's stability. Among those closest is his younger brother, Matthias, who watches Rudolph's reign with quiet calculation. Patient, politically astute, and ambitious, Matthias recognizes the emperor's vulnerabilities, indecision, preoccupation with study, and the volatile loyalties of the Bohemian nobility. He cultivates allies, subtly questioning Rudolph's decisions and creating the perception of mismanagement. The seeds of betrayal are sown in whispers, in deferred counsel, and in the careful shaping of opinion, moving like a shadow through the court. Tension builds over decades. Rudolph grows increasingly isolated, his advisors divided, and his court fractured by competing factions. Matthias capitalizes on the emperor's absences and obsessions, presenting himself as a stabilizing force to nobles and foreign powers alike. Letters, treaties, and allegiances shift in his favor, often unnoticed, until the balance of influence has quietly tipped. The climax arrives when Rudolph, weakened by indecision and illness, is effectively sidelined. Matthias assumes authority over Bohemia and much of the Habsburg dominions, not through battle, but through patient, relentless manipulation. Rudolph retains titles, but loses control, a ruler betrayed not by enemies abroad, but by the careful ambition of his own blood. The Hrabkany castle remains, its walls heavy with history, echoing with lessons of family, trust, and ambition. In Prague, the story endures. Even the closest kin can become the instrument of a ruler's undoing. And betrayal often moves silently, patiently, and inexorably, leaving the throne intact while eroding the heart of loyalty itself.